if you're the type of person that something sad happens, you start bawling your eyes out, shaking and crying, doesn't make you less of a man, doesn't make you less of a woman, doesn't make you a coward. It's what you do from that. If you can sit there crying and shaking, but you stand up and do the right thing, that's amazing. Welcome back to The Everyday Stoic with myself, William Mulligan, author of The Everyday Stoic, Simple Rules for a Good Life. Today's lesson, I'll be taking a few excerpts from my book to help bolster my point, to expand on my point in a better way. Today's video is about what is the goal of Stoicism? What were the Stoics working towards? Why were they doing what they do? What can you expect from Stoicism? And why are you even following Stoicism? What is the goal of Stoicism? The goal of Stoicism is to achieve a state called Eudaimonia. And modern Stoic Donald Robertson said this: in classical philosophy, a distinction is often made between more passive sensory pleasure, also known as hedone, and the kind of happiness, also known as eudaimonia, that comes from rational activity in accord with the psychological virtues. According to this view, true happiness is constant and self-generated. It comes from within, as the cliche goes. For example, an authentic sense of happiness may come from the knowledge that one has acted freely and with genuine integrity, courage, and wisdom in accord with one's highest psychological strengths and values. The pleasure that comes from indulging in sex, food, drink, drugs, or glorifying in praise from others is passive in the sense that it depends upon external stimulation. It is, therefore, transient and not entirely under our control, but depends upon fortunate circumstances. The happiness that comes from loving truth, reason, integrity, and wisdom, by contrast, is autonomous. It depends only upon itself. That's what Donald Robertson says. So, eudaimonia, in the simplest terms, is happiness / human flourishing. It's an amazing state to achieve, and it's possible. But how do we achieve this? Marcus Aurelius, the great Stoic lecturer, the great Stoic philosopher and Emperor of Rome, known as the Philosopher King and the last great Emperor of Rome, he said this: you know from personal experience that in all your detours, the good life was nowhere to be found, not in logic or wealth or prestige or sensual pleasure, nowhere. So, where is it to be found? In doing what your human nature requires. And how is one to do this? By adhering to principles that guide your impulses and actions. What principles? Those that are concerned with good and bad, and state that nothing is good for a human being except what makes him honest, moderate, courageous, and self-reliant, and that nothing is bad except what inculcates the opposite qualities in him, says Marcus Aurelius. So in short, eudaimonia is achieved when living in accordance with nature. This was first explained to us by Cleanthes, who was the second head of the Stoic school. Very olden times, in around 300 BC, Cleanthes said, live in accordance with nature. This is the goal. This is the aim. I'll explain what nature is in full in an episode. It's a very tricky term to understand. But to achieve eudaimonia, simply put, we have to follow these 3 rules. Number 1, take responsibility. Number 2, focus on what you can control. And number 3, live with arete. I'll explain these because it's very simple, and this is how you can achieve the state of eudaimonia. And what's amazing about Stoicism is eudaimonia is not this great end goal that you're going to achieve one day. At the ripe age of 80, you get there and you're like, I'm finally achieved eudaimonia. When you start living in accordance with these rules, you start to be in that state of eudaimonia. You start to live the good life, and it's an amazing way to be. So first, you understand, number one, take responsibility. You are in control. You are the captain of your ship. You are the master of your fate. You are in the driving seat of your life. It is you and no one else. You have to understand that for anything else to make sense that follows. You are in control. So take responsibility for the following actions in your life. Now you understand you're in control. It's a fact, you're in control. Take responsibility for everything. Number two, focus on what you can control. So the reason this is important is so that we don't waste our energy focusing on the things we don't control, wasting our life, our energy, our focus on all these externals that we do not control. So simply put, Epictetus, the Greek-born crippled slave, the famous Stoic philosopher, he wrote the Arete and the Discourses. Well, his student wrote them, but they were based off of his words. He said, some things are within our power, others are not. And this is the principle behind a lot of modern therapy, this one passage from his Arete. Some things are within our power, others are not. Within our power are our opinion, motivation, desire, and aversion. In a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power, our wealth, our health, our reputation, our office, and in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. So the only thing that is in our power is this internal world. So like you said, opinion, motivation, desire, aversion. All these things going on around us, they're not in our power. The weather, the traffic, they're not in our power. The way people behave, not in our power. But the way we perceive this, the way we react to this, and the things we either move towards that or we move away from that. Our motivation, going towards it, our aversion, going away from it, our opinion about it. These things are within our power. How we respond to the external world is ours. No one can take that away from us. So now you understand, number one, take control. Number two, understand what is within your power. And I will explain these in later lessons in so much depth that you can't help but just understand it so much, like the great Stoics did. You'll understand it. Hopefully this episode is enough, but further lessons, you'll get a better understanding. So the last one, and this is the trickiest one, and this one I'll use some help from my book. Arete, live with arete. What is arete? Arete, simply put, means good or excellence, but we're translating arete to virtue, especially for the point of this lesson. Virtue is a good translation, and I'll read my book to explain what I mean by virtue, because it's probably not what most people commonly think of virtue. So this is from chapter 1 of my book, just explaining the basics of Stoicism. In ancient Greece, one of the ways, the virtues, so we're talking about arete is good and virtue is good. Virtue alone is good. The Stoics said things are either good, bad, or indifferent. Virtue alone is good, vice alone is bad. Everything else in the world is indifferent. Health, wealth, sports cars, all that kind of thing. They're just indifferent. They can be good, can be bad. It depends how you use them. And you might say, well, health's always good. The health of an evil dictator, punishing people, that's not good. And, wealth's good. It buys you nice things. Wealth can be bad if you use it to buy loads of alcohol and you become an alcoholic and ruin your life, or use it to abuse people, you that kind of thing. So virtue alone is good. And that's what we're talking about here, arete. In ancient Greece, one of the ways the virtues were depicted was as a tetramorph, an image of 4 animals signifying each virtue. A man for wisdom, a lion for courage, an eagle for justice, and an ox for moderation, or what I call temperance, what the Stoics called temperance, moderation. But even thinking about what we, in the modern world, may or may not associate with each animal, do we understand what further ideas we can connect to each virtue? Wisdom, for example, can also mean a good calculating mind, a quick wit, discretion, subtlety, resourcefulness, and plain good sense. It is the ability to recognize what is and isn't within our power, the dichotomy of control. What is good and bad in this world, like I said, good, bad, indifferent, and functions as the cornerstone of the 4 virtues. If we know what helps us flourish, we understand better our own natures and what benefits the wider world around us. And Stoicism doesn't consider wisdom binary. It's not that there are people born wise and people born foolish, and that's how we stay forever. As with any virtue, or indeed any skill, wisdom can be practiced and improved. And why wouldn't you want to improve a skill? It all begins with practice, with understanding wisdom and the meaning of the virtues, and letting them guide our actions. Like any new skill, the start is always the trickiest, but also the part where we learn the most. So it's an exciting point. When you start learning about these principles of Stoicism, it is exciting. It's when you learn the most, but it's also the difficult stage when you're questioning a lot of things. The next virtue, moderation. Moderation also incorporates modesty, self-control, and good discipline. We can sacrifice ourselves in service of wisdom and courage, avoid greed and vanity, and take an honest look at what we truly need, and limit our wants to those things that are reasonable, what our reasonable judgment decides. Moderation is not simply self-discipline where we choose to exercise it. Doing 3 hours at the gym just so we can justify eating too much junk food that makes us feel worse, this isn't moderation. Dedicating ourselves to working longer hours so we can achieve more in our jobs at the cost of relationships with our family and friends, this isn't moderation. Staying on a sofa for an entire weekend and not stepping outside for fresh air or to visit friends after a hard week at work isn't moderation. The middle path might not be the easy to find at first, but as with all Stoicism, the more we practice, the simpler our choices and decisions become. Which brings us to the next virtue, courage. Courage includes the habits of cheerfulness, endurance, confidence, industriousness, and maintaining moral principles, making the space in your mind to face your own fears and to carry and manage difficult feelings, including hunger, pain, or tiredness. When Musonius Rufus, he was the teacher of Epictetus. Epictetus was the Greek-born crippled slave, the great Stoic teacher, this incredible man. But his tutor, Musonius Rufus, who people say is an even greater man, he was a Stoic philosopher. When he was exiled by Emperor Nero to the harsh island of Gyros, he celebrated the practice that the island offered him to hone his Stoic principles and enjoy the occasional company of fellow philosophers there. Not that you need to find a remote desert island to find your inner Stoic courage, but it doesn't hurt to remember that fear does a greater harm to us than almost anything we will ever fear. And courage removes both the fear that can paralyze us and the pain of carrying it. Which brings us to our final virtue, the final good, or arete, as we're talking about, because we're talking about living with arete. So the final one, justice, which, though it might bring to mind the idea that we have to take responsibility to somehow introduce a legal system into our daily lives, it can also signify ideas of honesty, fairness, equity, piety, and fair dealing. Far more achievable, perhaps, in our day-to-day existence, we can easily strive to help others, do good, aim for a common benefit to all, such as picking up rubbish, which I like to do. On my dog walk, I try to pick up rubbish every single time from my house to the park, clean the park, and back. And that's my little bit of good, which makes me feel good. And I know I'm doing something positive towards the benefit of mankind. Anyway, work towards kindness and fairness and avoid anger. By developing the habits of fairness and help to all, we improve our own lives immeasurably. Think what a weight you lift from yourself if you automatically go to help those you consider your enemy. Soon, you wouldn't even have any enemies. Whether or not they feel the same, the issue will have been removed from your own mind. Stoics believed that justice is the most important of all these virtues, since without justice, we're only serving ourselves. Which is interesting, actually, because people criticize the Stoics, say it's all about being selfish, it's all about doing things for you, me. But actually, most of them considered justice the most important of the virtues, helping people. And many of them actually encourage their students to go out there and challenge things with courage, challenge the way things are for the common good. So in short, wisdom is essential to know what is and isn't in our power and what is good and bad in the world. Courage is essential to act on our knowledge of this wisdom. Justice is essential to share and spread the four virtues and the philosophy of Stoicism. Moderation is essential to maintain our practices and our habits. And this brings us to the flip side of the coin. The bad, which is the opposite of arete, the opposite of virtue, which is the vices. And this is foolishness, cowardice, injustice, and intemperance. So, in summary, well, actually, I'll just go on a point about courage. A lot of people think, I can't be courage because I get scared. I know I've felt this way, and I get this message a lot saying, I struggle with courage. I can be wise, I can be just, I can be kind, all this kind of things. But I can't be courageous. I'm not a brave person. Listen to this story about an Athenian Stoic. This guy was a Stoic teacher, and he, like many Stoics back then, they were seen as like these badasses, these strong, great warrior types, these hero types. That's kind of how they were portrayed. And anyway, as the story goes, traveling across the waters of the Ionian Sea, a violent storm began to beat at the hull and the sails of a ship. The waves grew higher and began to fill the ship with water. Among the passengers was a Stoic teacher from Athens. During the storm, his face turned white, and the look of fear was strewn across the details of his face. When the sky cleared and the sea calmed, another passenger approached the Stoic and asked him, "What does this mean, Sir Philosopher, that when we were in danger, you were afraid and turned pale, while I neither feared nor changed colour?" The Stoic dismissed the man because of his disrespectful tone. But later in the journey, another passenger approached the Stoic and respectfully asked him the reason for his fear. The Stoic responded differently to this curious man and offered him a part of Epictetus' work specifically related to fear. And this is from the Stoic writer, the Stoic teacher, Epictetus, and this is from his Enchiridion. And this doesn't exist anymore. It's from a book that we don't know of. Well, it's gone. It's been lost to time. I think it was book 5. So we don't have this anymore, unfortunately, but this is a small passage that's been reserved from Epictetus. And they say that there is this difference between the mind of a foolish man and that of a wise man, and that the foolish man thinks that such visions are in fact as dreadful and terrifying as they appear at the original impact of them on his mind. And by his assent, he approves of such ideas as if they were rightly to be feared, and confirms them. But the wise man, after being affected for a short time and slightly in his colour and expression, does not assent, but retains the steadfastness and strength of the opinion which he has always had about visions of this kind, namely that they are in no wise to be feared, but excite terror by a false appearance and vain alarms. So the idea of this passage from Epictetus is basically saying the Stoics had this real good knowledge of psychology, therapeutic techniques, actually very comparable to modern day psychological understanding. So they were saying these visions, you get them. So he's in a storm and instantly he gets scared. And, some people are just naturally prone to certain things. Some people get a fear of heights. Some people get whatever it is. But say it's on a storm, he's got a fear and it hits him, the ship feels like it's about to sink. He gets it and he feels it. He feels the fear. But then when it passes, he doesn't add to it. He doesn't go, oh no, how terrible, how dreadful. The storm's gone. He no longer fears it. It's gone. When he was in that moment, he got the vision of the storm. It hit him like a ton of bricks and he felt it. But he didn't sit there making things worse. He just felt what was, because these natural feelings, this is why I'm saying this passage about you don't feel courageous. You might feel scared. Things might scare you. I've been there in life. But this doesn't mean you're not courageous. If you can feel these feelings, but then do the right thing regardless. That's courage. So this Athenian Stoic, he, when the storm calmed, he was fine. He didn't add to it, didn't complain, didn't catastrophize. He just felt it for what it is. And this is the old saying about the arrow. The first arrow always hits. The first arrow always hits. So you feel that fear regardless. You're going to feel it. Someone insults you, you're going to feel the insult. Difficulty in life, you're going to go like, oh, no, difficulty. But then it's your choice whether the second arrow hits. You choose to stand in that way and let it hit you and make it worse. But the first arrow always hits. That's the point. You're going to get scared. You're going to feel pain. You're going to want to feel like crying. You're going to want to feel like giving up. You're going to feel all these things. Depending on who you are, you feel different things. The important part is what you do after feeling that. If you're the type of person, something sad happens, you start bawling your eyes out, shaking and crying, doesn't make you less of a man, doesn't make you less of a woman, doesn't make you a coward. It's what you do from that. If you can sit there crying and shaking, but you stand up and do the right thing, that's amazing. When I see that kind of thing, I see it as more empowering, more inspiring. It's just so amazing that you can feel all this emotion, feel all this pain, and then you can stand up and do what you think is right, or do what the Stoics said was right. So to summarize, ultimately, eudaimonia is achieved when we follow virtue and we use virtue to determine our actions. That's simply put. So the goal of Stoicism is to achieve this state of eudaimonia. It's to live in accordance with nature, which is achieving this state of eudaimonia. I'm going to explain what living in accordance with nature is, because that is the telos, the end goal of Stoicism. The founder, the second head of the Stoic school, he said this. He says, it's to live in accordance with nature. So people hear that when they get into Stoicism, they go, what does nature mean? What does logos mean? What does anorexia mean? What does arete mean? What does eudaimonia mean? Who's Musonius Rufus? Who's Chrysippus? Who's Portia Catanus? All these things. People ask all these questions, and I'm going to explain them in later episodes in depth, so you get a full understanding. So if you just stick around, if you're on YouTube, follow, subscribe. If you're on streaming platforms, click that follow. Give me a rating if you've been listening for a long time. Appreciate it. It means a lot, because I'm seeing those ratings on Spotify. There's 11 5 stars. It makes me feel good. Externals make me feel good. Hypocrite. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I hope you have a lovely day.